All right. Yes, The Cult, from their second album as The Cult. That is, of course, Love Removal Machine from Electric. A great, great album following up Love. And when they were recording that album, I believe in New York City, Robert Plant just happened to be in the studios and walked over and heard him doing that song with the baby, 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 I fell from the sky. I'm keeping my voice down. And he came over and he said, I like what you're doing. Because, of course, that's a reference to Zeppelin. So great stuff from The Cult. Let's get into it, everybody. Let's start rocking it. Now, we will see that amongst many of the things we're going to be discussing on the warfare front, we're going to be seeing information about Iran. We'll be seeing information about Ukraine, information about Lebanon, those attacks on the hospitals, and a lot more. And I want to show you this. This is going to start things off. The hubris platoon. The first thing I want to mention is some people already saw that on X, I responded to Donald Trump's lies about him saying that he was not supplying weapons to Ukraine. And we're going to dive into that because some people were skeptical of what I had to say. And all they had to do was look it up. And I'm not saying this as a challenge, but it astounds me that people will actually lap up the lies of this platoon. Let me give you this information, okay? First off, we're going to look at some of the characters who are in the platoon. Right off the bat, Mike Schmuckabee. Here we go.
Chuck Schumer is a senator from New York. He's the most prominent Jewish elected official in America. He wrote a book last year, Mr. Ambassador, called Anti-Semitism in America. He has not condemned Mandami's comments. What does that tell you?
He's a coward. He is a coward for not calling this out. And if he doesn't, then I hope that nobody ever calls him a Jewish leader again. I'm not even Jewish, and I think I'm probably a much more effective Jewish leader than somebody who will not say what Mandami is, and that is an anti-Semite. You just can't go any other way with this.
Chuck. So let's see if we can figure this out. Have you heard Mandami say anything about Jewish people as an ethnicity or a religion or anything like that? Or has he simply called out the genocide and presented the possibility that he might arrest Benjamin Netanyahu for an ICC warrant that is out for his arrest? Then later, some people were skeptical and said maybe he was just doing it for political purposes. Don't give him so much attention. But it did allow a door to open to look again at what the United States did to create the ICC, merely to act as a propagandistic tool to attack foreign leaders when they wanted to depict them as bad guys. But now that the ICC has cited Benjamin Netanyahu and others inside the Israeli government for very, very clear acts of genocide and war crimes, for which Donald Trump and Mike Huckabee and Pete Hegseth and even Tulsi Gabbard and many others could be cited because they were all part of many extrajudicial murders, and the United States continued to fund the genocide in Gaza and now further attacks throughout the Middle East. Well, now the United States doesn't like the ICC. So Donald Trump will not act on the ICC warrant. They're not officially part of the ICC. And Mandami comes out and says, you know what? It looks like we wouldn't be able to do this. I do believe there is a way that they could do it. And the way that I think they could do it is to get someone else from another country to ask for extradition and then arrest that man from Israel when he comes to the UN very soon and extradite him. Now, they might run afoul of the United States government for some reason. I don't know exactly whether or not they would be able to get away with it quickly enough. But based on Donald Trump's extrajudicial precedent of sending people to CCOT without any trial whatsoever, I would think that Mandami could act on that. And if I were in his shoes and I were the mayor, and even if Donald Trump threatened to arrest me, I would do it. I would do it. That's if I were a statist. And this guy claims, well, I'm not even Jewish. Guess what, Mike? You're not Christian either. Because if you understood what the new Israel is, it's not a polis. There's no possible way that the polis is consistent with Christianity, because the polis subsumes the natural rights of the individual that are given to him by God. The polis operates through extortion, theft, and coercion. And those things are prohibited even by the Old Testament. Do you get it? I don't think so. Let's continue. Oh, here's another charmer just a couple towns away from me. Her family comes from. Yes, you got it. Caroline Levitt. Listen to the question as she is asked a very simple question. Why does Saudi Arabia, under Donald Trump's arrangement, which fell apart within 24 hours, why does Saudi Arabia get to do a deal with Donald Trump where they can now develop so-called nuclear power without even any inspections, whereas Iran was developing nuclear power and was open to inspections, and the United States then claimed that they were operating to create nuclear weapons when they weren't? How is it that Iran can't do it, but Saudi Arabia not only can do it, they can join in joint ventures with us, the taxpayers now? So let's watch as she wonderfully answers this question.
Ask you one other question. Sure. Just playing devil's advocate, why does Saudi Arabia get a civilian nuclear deal, but Iran doesn't get a civilian nuclear deal?
Well, again, this agreement is still being worked out. Well, it will eventually, hopefully, be finalized with the condition that the president spoke about this morning. But this agreement in particular, as it's been discussed thus far, does give priority access for American companies in the Saudi nuclear energy program, which will ultimately benefit American industry workers and supply chain. So the deal that has been discussed thus far and will continue to be discussed absolutely puts America first, and that's obviously very important to this president. Ed.
So don't question it. It puts America first, and special companies will be able to work with the Saudis. So fascism, that's the answer. Have a nice day. Isn't that great? Now, the deal has fallen through. The deal has fallen through because Donald Trump added something to it. I know. What a shocker. What a total surprise. A deal, and then he doesn't abide by the deal. He added that Saudi Arabia would have to join, you got it, the Abraham Accords. And Saudi Arabia, despite all of its terrible doings against Yemen and the fact that it's basically a fake kingdom, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia said, you know, there's one part that we have already agreed to, which is that Palestine is supposed to have a separate state. And so we can't acknowledge the kingdom of Israel in Jerusalem, that wonderful state. So they're saying it's probably not going to work. But, you know, if you listen to Caroline Levitt, don't question anything, everybody. Okay. Oh, look, here's another charmer. Hey, there's Marco. Let's get some facts on the ground on this guy right now. How about this?
We remain open to diplomacy. We remain open to working it out in a negotiated way. But right now, they don't seem to be serious about that. And so we're going to continue to protect shipping. We think other countries should join us in that endeavor. We don't need them to, but they should, because they're more impacted by it than we are. And at the same time, we are going to, when the opportunity presents itself, degrade their ability to target global shipping.
So, okay. If the United States is already in control of the strait and the United States already destroyed the ability of Iran to do anything, as we saw Pete Hegseth squirming yesterday when he was on Capitol Hill, and he just basically didn't want to answer because he had said back in March that the United States had destroyed the Iranian military and their ability to control the strait, and yet they're asking for more money so that they can somehow pull the control of the strait away from Iran and destroy Iran's military capability that they already said was destroyed, all for the purpose of course, destroying their nuclear so-called program, which they told us they destroyed last year in June, and which, of course, was never a nuclear weapons program because, of course, they were open to inspections and they showed people that it was a nuclear energy program. But, you know, lie after lie, eventually somebody's got to catch on like a fish on a hook and say, oh, I got caught on the lie. I totally understand. This is great. I understand how this all works. Oh, look, we've got another charmer here. This is from Fox. Here we go. This is great. This is another one of, hey, we got everything under control. Don't worry. Stay on the Titanic.
Are you worried that maybe we're in a forever war again?
Nobody wants to end this conflict more than President Trump. He's executing a war at the moment to protect our children and grandchildren. to ensure this dangerous regime never has nuclear weapons, the ability to take the world to its knees. President Trump is working hard, but there's only one position that the Iranians respect, and that's the position of strength. They will get to a continued weakened posture, and I hope that will yield an outcome. A negotiated settlement would be the best outcome. But President Trump knows it is about peace through strength. He'll have relentless force used against this corrupt, evil regime until they are taken to their knees.
Yeah, you know, that corrupt, evil regime, like those 170 kids in that school, February 28th. And as we know, you know, it's a nuclear, just like George W. Bush. I also, curiously enough, Iran also was not pursuing a nuclear anything. They were pursuing nuclear power. And then there's the whole doing it for your grandkids thing. And Donald Trump will handle it, this evil regime. And, you know, we'd like to see a negotiated settlement. You had a negotiated agreement before called the Memorandum of Understanding that was going to lead towards further negotiation. And while you literally saw Donald Trump signing it, Marco Rubio was negotiating with Lebanon to breach that agreement. So, yeah, methinks perhaps the smokestack is no longer showing that there are any fires down below inside the brain. That seems to be the way that it goes. But then again, the blank screen, maybe that's a depiction of what's going on inside that guy's mind. It certainly depicts what is inside the souls of many of these people. That's for darn sure. All right, let's get into some of the other major items, everybody, and go over to the news notes. So check this out. Right away, we've got this. Iran. For all the fans of the U.S. military who think the Trump administration is respectful of either the U.S. Constitution or the members of the armed forces, well, take a look at this. Check this out, everybody. I don't know if you saw this. Got to hand it to Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mario Nawfal and many others. OS Insider, Inside Defender says, as Marjorie Taylor Greene's got this info, the so-called Department of War, you know those 4 people that died recently? Well, the original number of deaths was 18. They have reduced it. Why have they reduced the number to 14? Get this. It's not that they're not dead. The Department of War, says Marjorie Taylor Greene, is not counting these Americans. Trump just literally 2 days ago, along with Hegseth, supposedly went to one of those noble recognition of services as they drew the bodies off the plane. Yeah, they are not counting these American service members' deaths in the official tally of dead U.S. soldiers from Trump's war against Iran, because they claim they were killed after Trump signed the MOU. After Trump signed the MOU. Even though we were bombing every day. Did you get that? So technically speaking, Trump is pretending that there was no war, that they got killed in non-conflict, which will have a bearing on how much their family members get compensated, what honors they might get, despite the fact that they shouldn't have gone there and they were breaching the Constitution. And that senator who was speaking on Fox a little bit earlier, when he's talking about the responsibility they have, the one thing that he's responsible for doing is upholding the U.S. Constitution. And Donald Trump, when he says Donald Trump is engaging in this war for X or Y reason, it's as if Donald Trump can just do these things. It shows you how slipshod their understanding is of ethics, how loose their hold is on the Constitution. They don't care. It's all a front. So OSINT Defender says on Thursday, the Department of War lowered the total number of American service members officially killed during the Iran war from 18, not a war, to 14, removing the 4 service members killed during the most recent round of hostilities. Why? Because they're not technically calling them hostilities. Yeah, Mario Nawfal's got this. And they attach a very pertinent picture. This is just, the contrast is stunning. Mario writes, actually, it's Samuel on his team. Official U.S. casualty figures for the Iran conflict just dropped. The Pentagon's public tally of service members killed has been cut from 18 to 14. The recent deaths in Jordan and Iraq were taken off the list because they happened after the April ceasefire declaration. The Pentagon's own spokesman offered a different reason, attributing the change to, quote, technical problems. And that's when they took some of the bodies off the plane. So literally, about 36 hours after they welcomed the cold bodies of those people, they did that. And for those people who have a sense that somehow this can be equated to patriotism, what the United States military is doing and following these orders blindly, that must really hurt. But I don't think it's going to wake up many MAGA people, that's for sure. Because they won't wake up to other things like the logistics and the realities on the ground. The logistics and realities of Iran's strengths are obvious. The U.S. is moving soldiers into civilian structures and zones, and that is vile. The IRGC today issued a public warning to civilians across the Gulf. So the Americans are doing just like what the Israelis do, telling the people around these areas to physically distance themselves from anywhere U.S. troops might be sleeping. Quote, civilians in countries hosting U.S. troops are warned, said the IRGC, to immediately stay at least 500 meters away from locations. They issued this for Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, Oman, and Saudi Arabia. And Patrick Henningsen says it well. Exactly as we warned 3 weeks ago, he has this breaking news. This coming from Declassified UK, the Brits are getting further involved. Iran's IRGC has warned that any British military base used by the U.S. to launch attacks on Tehran will become a legitimate target. This comes after reports that new UK Prime Minister Andy Burnham will continue to allow U.S. raids on Iran from RAF bases in Britain. Well, they won't be RAF bases for very long. Unbelievable. And the U.S. is moving more air refueling assets into the region. That's a dark sign. The exact opposite of what Larry Johnson reported was starting. And then Larry said they're reversing it, and they are. 10 or more U.S. Air Force KC-135R aerial refueling tankers with the last drops of U.S. jet fuel coming along arrived from the U.S. to Israel bases in the past few hours, bringing the total to nearly 100 aerial refueling tankers in Israel, with the massive USAF airlift from Europe to the Middle East still ongoing. Yeah. Now, the obvious is something I want to discuss, but I want to get your thoughts on this, especially about those soldiers and what Donald Trump did. Is this something that you would have expected? I would have. I would have expected it very, very much. So I want to turn things over to you all and see what you've got to say. We're going to head over to Rumble for the first time, say hi to everybody, and then come back and finish off this segment of the program. But I don't want time to go by before we hear from you. Karen Carpenter's in the house. She's going to have her own show. Watch that, folks. She will be on with Knights of the Storm tomorrow, 2 o'clock, Saturday on Rumble. And check out Knights OTS on X. Karen is great. Karen, hello. Little John, hey, how are you, man? Smuhaski, great to see you. Thank you for being there, everybody. And let's check out your comments. Let me know what you think. And of course, since this is the last night of the week, let me know if you've got nominees for the Bad Attitude of the Week award. Drop them in there, everybody. Just unbelievable what these people are doing. Do you have members of the family who are in the military? Do you? Hi, says little Johnny. Hi, little Johnny. Great to see you, man. Do you think that any of the MAGA people will wake up to what Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth are doing to those folks? And as you know, my dad and my uncle were in World War II. They, or at least my father did, later understood what had been done to manipulate people to get them to sign up to go into World War II. He understood what FDR was like economically for the longest time, anti-constitutional. And Karen's mentioning Tuesday at 8:30 is my show. Hugs, Guard. You got it, Karen. We will be promoting that, and we will do that Rumble raid Tuesday, 8:30. Rumble. Can't wait. And Handy says, I nominate me. Bad attitude in spades. The Ace of Spades. By the way, have you seen the Reverend Horton Heat rockabilly version of the Ace of Spades? It's great. They toured with Motorhead. They're good. They were good friends. Great stuff. And what musicians in the Reverend Horton Heat's band. Now, back to the news here. I said, meanwhile, let's remember the obvious, but worth remembering often. This running as a subroutine beneath the fact that the U.S. Congress has not issued a declaration of war, despite all the promulgations and all the prognostication and all of the prancing and the dancing of those people who appear on Fox saying they've got a responsibility for your grandchildren. Of course, they're bankrupting them and enslaving them to stop a so-called Iranian nuclear weapons program that never existed. Well, here's Thomas Massey. Here is something that doesn't probably need amplification, just reiteration. Let me explain this absurd ruse. The Pentagon is pretending there have been 2 Iran wars separated by a brief ceasefire. The reality, by going more than 90 days without congressional authorization, the Secretary of War is breaking the law. And of course, they're already breaking the Constitution, because there has to be only one thing, a declaration of war, to go up against a foreign government. And Arik Tola writes, the Pentagon removed the names of those 4 service members who died in Jordan from their official list of casualties. They explain that this is because their deaths occurred after President Trump declared a ceasefire in the war in April. So can you imagine if my uncle had been down there with Patton in the Italian Alps, where he got 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star, saved 5 guys' lives because they were over the line, and he found out a way to get them out of the lines and past lines. Then he got shot and he got run over by a tank, but squished into the mud, got up and kept running. My uncle E. Gardner Goldsmith, Ernest Gardner Goldsmith, no longer with us. Can you imagine if there had been a brief period when it turns out while he was doing that, somehow the president, Roosevelt, had discovered that there was this magic thing that could say, well, yeah, they weren't actually casualties of war. Just for semantics purposes, the lives of those military people and their family members will forever be changed now, because they're not going to get the recognition that they deserved. And I'm saying that within their bubble of what they think they deserve. They should not have gone. They should not have answered the unconstitutional, anti-constitutional orders. Let's turn now to this very, very good exchange. Actually, I'm going to go to one other exchange. We saw that clip a little bit earlier of that politician from the United States. Let's look at that guy again once more as he tells us what is so, so important here, right? Okay, let's check it out. Remember this. I want to show you, and you saw a little clip there as we move forward a little bit at the very start of the show, a clip from the Daniel Davis deep dive as he was on with Alistair Crook. But check this out.
Are you worried that maybe we're in a forever war again?
Nobody wants to end this conflict more than President Trump. He's executing a war at the moment.
So again, you can end it right now by actually abiding by your friggin' oath. You people are just dirty people. Now let's hear from some people who are trying to tell the truth.
Okay, a lot to unwind there, but Iran's just corrupt, evil regime, so I don't know how you can negotiate with them. But whatever, we still need negotiations. But hang on, we had a negotiated deal with the MOU that was supposed to pave the way for those very end of war negotiations, and we messed those up after 1 week by inserting something into paragraph 5 about the Strait of Hormuz. How do you see, first of all, just the framing that the mainstream America, especially this Republican party with the Senate right there. How do you view that as compared to the reality?
Now, before we open up with Alistair Crook, and there's the freeze frame that you saw a little bit earlier, before we open up things to his very insightful answer, derived from his answer, I want to bring something up because Alistair does a wonderful historical sort of sojourn for a moment and allows us to see some images here about tradition, the city on the hill, and the nation state of the United States derived from a certain Puritan ethic and things like that. I'm going to pull a philosophical strand out of that to wrap around this towards the end. And you probably know where I'm going to be going with it, but I think it is a great opportunity, again, to get up in front of the chalkboard as if I'm the lecturer and you're the student, and then you can do the same thing with me. You can be the lecturer, I can be the student in this two-way classroom. But I want to show what he has to say and then show how, if one looks deeper at it, one can learn about the philosophical canard of the state.
Well, I mean, I think that opens a really important question, the piece that you've just, the clip that you've just shown, because really, first of all, I mean, we have to look back and see what America is or what it stands for. But America was originally founded on, if you like, the ideals of a reform of the world, of that America is a light to the nations. It was going to be the new Israel, that it was the city on the hill, that it was almost a redemptive message, slightly messianic even, because it was, as America has this mission to change the world and to take it forward and to give it democracy and liberal values, etc. And that was implanted, I think, mostly by sort of the Protestant people who came to America. This idea of it, after all, a lot of it came out of the English Civil War, Cromwell's war, and the very strong Puritan and the strong sense of Old Testament redemption that was present in England at this time.
So this is where I want to stop it. I think it's extremely important, and I try to drive this point home often. I mentioned and referred to this lightly at the opening of the program. The state is not a person. And vesting the state with what one thinks is his own possible redemption, or some sense that the state is operating and I'm going to be praying for our country. There's no possible way that a person can pray for our country, because the nation state itself encompasses so many different people. The government is forced on people, and the government never gets redemption. The government doesn't seek redemption. The government is a machine in which people move in and out, into and out of, and they use this machine to do what they want. So the very idea coming out of the Enlightenment of self-fulfillment and possibly individual connection to God through the Puritan action of reading the Bible, studying the Bible, and trying to be pure, the Puritans. Well, you can't then transfer that into some sort of anthropomorphic application into a non-human entity called the state. This is where people completely get fouled up, and this is where the Zionist idea of the state of Israel really comes to the fore, because they think that God has blessed a nation state, just like many patriotic Americans think that in the grand tradition, somehow God had his hand in the creation of the nation state of America, and it's a great experimentation for individual freedom. Well, if it's an experiment in individual freedom, then you can't have the state. It's just impossible to put the two together. That doesn't work. And therefore, individuals are the only ones who are redeemed through their own beliefs, their own connections to Christ. And the actions of the state are always evil. It just depends on what scale of evil they are. The state is never the city on the hill, because that city only operates through crushing the rights and free choice of individuals, for telling those individuals, we are going to take your money. We are going to tell you, you must work for us. You are our slave. And if you don't respond properly, we will hurt you. There's no redemption in that. And if somebody signs on to that thinking that he's in a grand tradition of God-granted wisdom for the founders signed a document for you. Is that moral or ethical? Did you give permission? Did they have any ethical or moral prerogative to do that? No. I can't do that for you now. They certainly couldn't do that 200 plus years ago to you. There is no redemptive quality to any polis. It doesn't work that way. Polises don't want, they don't need, and they can't get redemption. Period. There are only people. That's all. The state is an artifice. The state is a theater. The state is a machine. It is an excuse for people to tell other people how to operate. Now, some of them can be a lot worse than others, but they are always operating on a negative. They are always operating on a threat. So the idea that the United States somehow could be less threatening than other states and maybe decentralized and promise people that, well, yeah, we're going to create a state that will be in perpetuity applying itself in rulership over other people, that's bad enough, but at least they can say they gave you some barriers. That's all you get. You don't get the shining city on the hill, like Reagan said, as wonderful and flowery as those words are. We've got to pare this down to real ethics, interpersonal relationships, and social arrangements, because the state breaches those. The state allows people to breach those with the excuse that they're doing right when they're not doing right. So from its inception, the breach of that leads to all of this. And you could see the breach start with Alexander Hamilton when they brought in the Constitution. So this is where Alistair Crook's comment, as valid as it is regarding how people adjudged the United States' intention, the founders' goals, as valid as that is, there's a deeper understanding to this that one can apply to all establishments of all states. And to miss that at this time, to say, oh, how far the United States has come from the founders' original idea. One can acknowledge that. Absolutely. That's great. But to miss the deeper lesson is to always open oneself up to the vulnerability of not recognizing that the state itself can never be redeemed, because the state runs opposite of your natural rights given to you by God, and it's just a group of people claiming power over you.
Somewhere along the line, and I'm not quite sure when, this changed in America. And now what you described and what you see and what we hear from America is Manichaeanism, not liberalism, not the sense of, a redemption and that we're all going to move on to new values and the world is going to come together in some wonderful, wonderful new shape. No, what we see, and we saw it, and it's not just Trump, and it's therefore not just, his influence on the Republican Party. We saw it with Biden. You remember the speech in front of Liberty Hall? I think he did it in front of Liberty Hall, the famous site, with cloaked in a sort of deep red hue of lighting. And it was all about not a future, a vision of the future. It was all about evil, good and evil. Putin is evil. Russia is evil. These are evil people. And we are the light. We are the good. And they are the bad. And they must be defeated. And that was really, I think it was in Prague, or he first said it, and then in front of the Liberty Hall. I mean, there was a clear shift. And it's a very disconcerting shift, because America has moved into this Manichaean vein, which you saw in that clip that you just put on the show, because, if you take this Manichaean view, there are two implications. First of all, there can be no negotiated settlement because, you go back to Karl Strauss and you go back to Leo Strauss and all of that. I mean, they were very clear. They were at the Chicago University, I think, and very influential people. But Karl Strauss made it clear. I mean, you have to blacken your adversaries so much that the idea of talking to them, negotiating with them, would be for you to fall to evil, you to become contaminated. And therefore, you can't negotiate. How do you negotiate with evil? You can't, is the answer that was coming out then. And this was deliberately, I think, implanted at that time by Strauss and other thinkers, and then has become sort of fixed. But there are more than that, because if you take that view, that is, it's impossible to talk with these people, which we saw, of course, during the war on terror. 9/11, I think, was the turning point, because then, these people, as it was always called, you can't listen to them, you can't talk to them, you can't hear anything from Hezbollah or from any of these movements. They have to be just defeated. But then there is a second implication, a darker implication. I mean, if you can't negotiate, and it's impossible to deal with this sort of evil, then of course the path to using weapons of mass destruction becomes much more open and much more prominent in thinking. And so it's very dangerous, this way of thinking. I remember taking people, I was in Canada and I was giving a talk. When I gave the talk, there was in the background, there was orchestra playing music for the audience and everything, and they were listening to the talk. And I was giving a talk to sort of businessmen in Canada. And at the end of the talk, I turned around and said, I don't know if you realize, but you've been listening to the Hezbollah orchestra, all in their tails, black coats, and playing Tchaikovsky. And you say you can't talk to these people? How can they be playing Tchaikovsky and you cannot find a word to say to them? But that's where we ended up with that period. And that's where it seems to me when Fox News are putting out statements, I think it was on Fox News, yes, were putting out sort of comments of the sort, these people are evil, you can't deal with them. Actually, the converse, they've got, I don't know, people say I was reading a little bit of Maggie Haberman's view, I think she was on your program maybe, of her new book, Regime Change, with her and Swan. And she says in this a couple of things. One was, in her view, Trump has always, for years, decades, had this animus against Iranians for reasons that no one seems really to know. But that, of course, they've been sort of...
I'll pause it right there. I want to mention that the statement that he offered there has a great deal to do, not the fact that the Iranians, he's not saying the Iranians are evil in any way, but I just want to make sure that Alistair Crook's point is reiterated properly on my side, is that obviously if the machinations and the people behind them have an objective to do X, Y, or Z, if they are consequentialists and they don't care about the morals that get them to their ends, the ends justify the means for them, then their objective is all that matters. And therefore, they will depict as pure evil anybody. And as we know, the Iranians are not the evil ones here. So that's the first point. And then from there, the whole idea of you can't negotiate with these people, the United States continually says we're the ones who are the good guys trying to engage in negotiations, and they keep changing things when we can clearly see which side is breaching these agreements, right? And he mentioned Leo Strauss, and that's an excellent point, because the propagandists, obviously, as they did with Iraq and they've done in so many other instances, will depict some enemy as some foreigner as the enemy in order to achieve their objective. And so I think that when the United States engages in this with other nation states that could end up being maybe more nefarious or something like that, there might be gradations of good and bad within these nation states and the operators within them. But when it comes to this one, it's very clear that the United States is the evil side, and the Iranians are not the ones who are engaging in the aggression against the United States, if one looks at it state-on-state violence. And, of course, the United States is attached to a very, very evil entity called, you got it, Israel. We'll talk about Israel in just a minute, and I want to point this out maybe towards the end of the show. I want to mention this. I was very, very delighted to hear the conversation between Judge Napolitano and Jim Webb today. And those of you who got to see it, or if you got to see Jim Webb's show, which is on Monday through Friday at noontime for a half hour, as I mentioned, he has his own YouTube show that's been going on for a little while now, Monday through Friday at noontime for a half hour. It was superb in the conversation on the judge's show. And then I got to watch Jim Webb on his show, and it was excellent. And I pointed out on X when I put out the post on this, every single thing that Jim Webb brought up about the United States, tactical, strategic, logistical problems, and the very unscrupulous manner in which the United States has been operating. It was just great to hear. It was really, really good. So he's going to have Bill Cooper on very soon. So that'll be terrific. And I think he's definitely more on the pretty hardcore libertarian side now, it seems to me. Now, I want to give you some of the other information here about Yemen and Saudi Arabia and the oil situation. As Mario Naffel writes, Saudi oil is being pushed through the Suez as Hormuz and Bab al-Mandab stay disrupted. But the backup plan is expensive. So check this out as a little asterisk that you can take away tonight as far as what could be coming in the future for fuel prices. According to LSEG data, fuel costs for a Saudi oil tanker nearly double from about 1.26 million to 2.87 million when transiting the Suez Canal, and they add roughly 1 million in canal fees. And they have a longer voyage if they want to get to the east. The longer voyage also means higher insurance premiums, longer delivery times, and fewer tankers available for other shipments. Check this out. Here is this alternative route from Mideast to Asia. So if they're going from Saudi, they can't do the pipelines sufficiently. As we said, those are very vulnerable as well. So they got to go through the Suez, then around Africa, then around the Horn, and we see this. The vessels in the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab al-Mandeb Strait exposed to attacks. An alternative route for a tanker carrying Saudi oil to Asia involves circumnavigating Africa, adding a month to the journey. 48 days compared to 19 days. So again, we're talking a $1.61 million increase in the transit, plus roughly $1 million in added canal fees. So that's what's going to be happening. In addition to the lack of oil, the transit costs are going to be going up. So I want to show you a close-up. I put this inside. So here's this Saudi's escape route through the Strait of Hormuz. This is what it looks like, obviously. And he says a typical Yanbu to Taiwan voyage has jumped from 19 to 48 days. Fuel costs have more than doubled with additional Suez fees on top. So there it is. And you can see that close up right there. Typically 19 days on the checkered, on the old dashed line, and then the blue line, 48. 29-day increase. Unbelievable. So that is what Donald Trump is bringing. It does seem very clear. Just as many people couldn't understand why he wouldn't stop these lockdowns in the states when they were completely contrary to the Bill of Rights, he is continuing this blind and reckless action. And then there's the Saudi nuclear deal, which Donald Trump changed, as we saw with Caroline Leavitt. He had originally agreed to let the Saudis start to develop nuclear power without any checks, meaning they could start to, refine their nuclear material to a nuclear weapons level. And then he added that they had to agree to the Abraham Accords. So we've got this. Yeah, Trump, of his own accord, wink, wink, was going to give nuclear material and tech to Saudi without any need for IAEA inspections. Well, maybe they could just get an Israeli spy to do that. They seem to have done that well decades ago. And of course, to help the fake kingdom develop nuclear power, they told us. This despite the U.S. falsely claiming that Iran, which only was developing nuclear power and was open to inspections, was somehow dangerous. But then, after less than a day, Trump added a condition that Saudi join the Abraham Accords, which would have seen Saudi formally recognize the Israeli government and borders as completely fine. The Saudis repeatedly have called for a unique Palestinian state. At least the corrupt regime has done that. So thus we see this. Saudi Arabia got its nuclear deal Wednesday and lost it by breakfast time yesterday. Yep, Wednesday afternoon, the full signing ceremony, flags on stage, Riyadh beamed all of it onto a big screen. But you got it. The Saudis got much of what they wanted, including uranium enrichment on their own soil once certain conditions were met, and limits on how far UN inspectors could go on suspected covert sites. Then Trump posted that Saudi had to join the Abraham Accords first. Well, he notes the timing is the interesting part. Fox spent the 7 a.m. hour yesterday asking why normalization with Israel wasn't attached. And Trump must have heard that, they assume, because his post about the change went up at 7:52. His own negotiators were blindsided, and so were the Saudis, who had treated the deal as a major win. Well, Donald, thanks for that great deal. The art of the deal, which are never deals. So the Saudis have said they won't abide by that agreement. Now, let's get to the West Bank. This is stunning, everybody. Let me give you this. The Israelis are acting on what we knew they were setting up last year. Remember when they said they were going to allow legal deeds beyond the green zone wall? Yep. Well, that's what they're doing. The Israelis just began burning a new line of Palestinian homes. And then, you probably saw this incredibly violent footage on X, they killed 4 local people, all under the so-called legality of the land deeds offered by the Israeli government last year. So here it is. That's, Mr. Smotrich out there telling everybody. Now, this is violent, everybody. I'm sorry to say this man here loses his life within seconds. And as Sarah Wilkinson writes, footage documents the moment an Israeli shoots a Palestinian in the head during a violent attack on the village of Farata, east of Qalqilia. Now, there's more. So I'm going to pack this all together, West Bank, Lebanon, and round things off. Let me give you this. Israeli human rights groups issued an urgent call. This is happening on our dime, on future kids not even born in the U.S. An urgent call for the international community to take immediate action to stop settler violence and prevent what they warned invader violence could become mass pogroms across the occupied West Bank. The statement signed by Yesh Din and more than a dozen other Israeli rights groups inside Israel, actually, said settler militias enabled and supported by the Israeli army, they were there, have escalated arson, property destruction, and forced expulsions. The groups said revenge attacks had already begun following the killings of Palestinians in Tel, with settlers, ministers, and Knesset members calling for further violence, which is exactly what they want. They want to provoke so they can respond just like they did in Gaza. So there's more. right here. An armed settler incursion into a Palestinian village ended with 4 Palestinians killed. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, get this, everybody, to add insult to this, yes, and his political opposition's response was to label a Palestinian then disarming and killing one of the Israeli soldiers a terrorist, and to punish the Palestinian communities collectively and promise further expansion of settlements. Netanyahu ordered a sweeping crackdown on Palestinians across the occupied West Bank. He said Israel would demolish the Palestinian man's family home, raid villages he called terror hotspots, confiscate weapons, and you know the rest. He praised the settlers for standing courageously. Those are the invaders. And we've got this, a hospital. Don't forget, what are they going to do then? Well, why not raid a hospital? Israeli forces raided Nablu's specialized hospital and stormed its emergency department, forcing doctors, nurses, and patients to the floor. Now, in Lebanon, you got it. Sarah's got this for us. Israel just wiped out the Sakina Beidon school, a school in Beit Jebel, South Lebanon, where, of course, they're continuing to occupy. Not a military base, not a battlefield, a school that taught generations of students a piece of the city's history. Gone. That's what it looks like. Got some great comments inside Rumble, by the way, especially about FDR and what he did to the Germans who had been prisoners of war, basically starving many of them to death. But I want to show you some of the good coverage from RT on this. So I'm going to go over to the RT coverage about the latest and wrap this up for you. And then we're going to talk very briefly about Donald Trump's lies on Ukraine and get your thoughts on where you think this is all going to be going. So let's get into this one right here. Got to cue this up for you. All right. All right. Here it is. West Bank violence. And you'll get to see Bezalel Smotrich, of course, because he was involved in helping hand out the land deeds, which is basically handing out stolen land. So here we go. Settler violence. RT has it covered.
Village of Farasa in the region's north. Meanwhile, in the village of Sara, Palestinians have reportedly taken to the streets to defend it against an attack by hundreds of settlers. The Israeli far-right settler movement has been openly calling for similar attacks against dozens of villages in the West Bank. And this follows another deadly incident that happened in another village southwest of Nablus, where 4 Palestinians were killed in an attack by Israeli forces and settlers. The Palestinian Health Ministry says 4 were also wounded. Israeli authorities separately reported that 1 settler had also been killed. And this all comes as the Israeli finance minister says that Palestinian villages should be cleared of terrorists and their infrastructure.
Their villages should look exactly like the refugee camps. The population must be evacuated for its own protection, and these villages must be cleared of terrorists and their infrastructure in order to restore deterrence and security to the area. The IDF must carry out land clearing operations, establish safety buffer zones around the communities, roads and farms, and restore security for the residents. The heroes of the farming outposts and the pioneers who serve as the security belt of the State of Israel.
And for more on this, let's now cross live to Palestinian journalist Mohammed Najib. Mr. Najib, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, as we've heard from Minister Smotrich, Israel now wants the West Bank to be completely cleared, and that would mean forcibly evicting locals from their own land. So what do you make of this announcement by such a prominent official?
Actually, Minister Smotrich is one of the strongest supporters and who backing the settlers' violence in the West Bank. And as the Israeli elections is ahead after 3 months or so, so he started his electoral campaign from the West Bank by encouraging the settlers to heavy crack down on Palestinians and to build and to approve more settlements in the West Bank. So it's a race of time to show how they can control annex the West Bank and want to force the Palestinians to leave it. So what's happening recently in the West Bank is unprecedented, significant violent escalations as every day, every week, there are groups of settlers, armed settlers, who are attacking Palestinian villages and villagers and killing them. And the IDF does nothing to protect them or to prevent those attacks. And this Smotrich is one of those who backing them and supporting them and protecting them from being punished by the Israeli justice system or stopped by the Israeli police.
Exactly. The Israeli government is encouraging it, and Smotrich, as we know already, told people, go ahead, get your land. Now, heading over to Rumble, let's see your comments. There was a great comment in here. Wow, lots of great comments. So I want to go back, and I hope I haven't missed too many of the comments. I see Birdhouse got a great suggestion to interview Tom DeWeese, president of the American Policy Center. Oh, yes, that would be great. And he has a link in there about the land grab. Excellent stuff. And I'm going to go up a little further here. Let's see. We've got, let's see. Hopefully I'm not missing anything. And there was, yes, here it is. So MOE Studios, I want to start with this one. MOE Studios says, reminds me of FDR revoking POW status to Germans after World War II and how they were starved to death after being herded into fields. It's incredible. It's just unbelievable. Then we've got Mark Young. See why the ancient nation of Israel lost its status as God's chosen people. Exactly. He's got a link in there if people want to find it. Mark, feel free to put that underneath as well, in the comments section. Anybody who wants to have those seen after the fact, so people, the stream, sometimes the whole stream doesn't show up. So feel free. It's open property. Smotrich says, go ahead. No, just kidding. Then we've got this. The Constitution says, Smuowski says, the Constitution lists the manner of elections, what government is, and prohibitions on it. And by the way, I wanted to mention that because you brought it to mind when I saw it on the other screen. This morning, I was hearing, of course, on WRKO, the great Jeff Cooner at his 6 o'clock start was talking about the importance of the SAVE Act and how important it is to make sure that foreigners don't vote in elections. As we saw in New Jersey, they had a glitch in their computer system and foreigners might have voted. And as I noted, again, it's important to keep in mind that the Constitution allows Congress to come up with rules regarding congressional and Senate votes, but the choosing of electors for the presidential office and that arrangement is set aside for the states, and the 9th and 10th Amendments reserve that for the states. So again, like I said, hypothetically speaking, states could potentially allow foreigners to vote. And as I noted day before yesterday, I think it was, various states started to allow women to vote before it was nationally done all across the country. So that's for president, just for president. Okay, so very important to keep that in mind. And of course, that's just, operating based on what the United States Constitution says they will promise for everybody. Now, I want to take a pause, everyone, because as you know, there is a new book that's going to be released from Aaron Mate. And Aaron Mate has in the book the process by which the United States overthrew Yanukovych in Ukraine. And Aaron often makes great points about how Donald Trump broke the intermediate range nuclear forces program treaty and supplied missiles to Ukraine, how NATO expanded contrary to the promises of Jim Baker in the 90s to the then breaking up Soviet Union. And I want to show you what Donald Trump claimed on Truth Social. And I just don't know how to, I guess it's just a matter of just, running on the treadmill. And every time he says something utterly ridiculous every day that is patently absurd and false to serve his own purposes, it'll be an opportunity to refute and talk to other people and say, are we on the right track? Are we speaking the truth? And that guy's lying. So here we go. And again, he's lying on top of the fact that the state is the ultimate lie, that somehow you gave your permission for it. So I'm going to read to you what Donald Trump said first. This is from Suleiman Ahmed. And Trump wrote on Truth Social. President Xi, at our recent meeting in Beijing, China, told me, and this has to do with Iran, that he would not, under any circumstances, give or sell weapons to the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that statement included Chinese companies. Considering our relationship, I take him at his word. And besides, I am doing him big favors. Really? Also, likewise, President Putin, despite the horrible war going on in Ukraine, the relationship remains as it does with President Zelensky, told me that he would not sell weapons to Iran. He told him, said Trump, he understands that I do not sell weapons to Ukraine, but to NATO countries. They pay full price, and how those weapons are distributed, I have no idea. Therefore, two major countries that people speak of often in terms of Iran are, in my opinion, not participating. If they did, it would be very bad for them. Certainly not in their best interest. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald Trump. So in this little segment of the program, let's focus on that. Because when you text or you write something online, you likely spend some time thinking about what you're saying, whether or not you should send it, whether or not you're being truthful. And then for the consequentialists, maybe if you think you might get caught in the lie. Donald Trump didn't think about any of those things. Evidently, he thinks people will lap this up like ice cream on a hot summer day. So I said Trump, in his first administration, broke the INF treaty by giving missiles to Ukraine. He and Congress are prepared to hand Ukraine another $9 billion. The U.S. still pays nearly 70% of all NATO expenses, and Trump intentionally set up this new roundabout arming of Ukraine merely to increase U.S. arms makers' profits. He also is lying about what the other leaders said or did not say. The Russian, Chinese, and Iranian governments all engaged in numerous agreements last year that include mutual support for many things, including development of nuclear power and defense. So, guess what? If you go to my X feed, you'll see that, yes, indeed, the Chinese have responded. They have very clearly responded. The Hormuz letter offers us this. China directly rejects Trump's latest Truth Social claim that Xi told him China would not sell weapons to Iran under any circumstances, saying, quote, as a comprehensive strategic partner, China strongly supports Iran in safeguarding its sovereignty, security, and national dignity. Why does he do stuff like this? Can anybody explain this? And again, if you have nominees for the Bad Attitude of the Week award, and you can include Trump, Netanyahu, Mike Huckabee, Hegseth, I'm just naming riffing right now. You let me know. The Chinese had to engage in expending energy to do that today. What is going on? It's like, it's, you know, people who have savant problems, you know, it's like Trump is like a warmonger savant. He just continually leans towards saying dumb stuff that's going to cause more people to die. That exposes him as a massive liar. Let me show you this. This is important. This also comes from Daniel Davis as he was on with Glenn Dyson. Daniel writes, this is not an insult or unkind comment, but it is now clear President Trump is suffering genuine cognitive impairment. In the Truth Social post shown in this video, President Trump flatly declared that we are not selling weapons to Ukraine and that he has no idea what NATO does with the weapons we sell them. That was directly and explicitly contradicted by Secretary of State Rubio in Senate testimony last month, confirming we very much do sell weapons to Ukraine, and we know exactly what NATO does with them. Not that we needed to prove something so self-evidently true, but this alarming claim by the president in public, when the whole world knows the reality, is evidence of genuine cognitive decline. No one thinking straight would ever so painfully expose themselves to a lie of this magnitude. With this man at the helm of our armed forces and making decisions that impact the financial and national security interests of our country, it is time for the cabinet officials and members of Congress, regardless of party affiliation, to explore immediately constitutional remedies for conditions like this. Failure to act now could prove catastrophic to our interests later when no remedy will be available. Now, whether you think that Daniel Davis is engaging in hyperbole or not, I'm just focusing on the contradictions and the lies of these people, because Trump isn't alone here, okay? And anybody who walks in lockstep behind Trump's statement is complicit in the lie. And they're not cognitively impaired. So what does that tell us about their ethics?
This is so far out of any kind of craziness. I don't sell weapons to Ukraine. He understands that I do not sell weapons to Ukraine, but to NATO countries, they feel full price. And how they are distributed, I have no idea. In light of that, how can he reconcile what his Secretary of State said in Senate testimony under oath?
We remain ready to play any role we can in that context of bringing a peace about, because we think the war in Ukraine, devastating war, has no military solution. It can only be solved through a diplomatic route, and it's been unfruitful. I would characterize it as the ongoing challenges. That said, let's be clear. We are not, to be fair and to be frank, we are not impartial mediators in that war. Okay, we don't provide weapons to Russia. We only provide weapons to Ukraine. We don't impose sanctions on Ukraine. We only impose sanctions on Russia. So we have clearly taken a side. We continue to sell weapons to Ukraine, by the way, through the Pearl program, unimpeded by what's happened in the Middle East or anywhere else. And look, we'd love to see that come to a negotiated settlement. As of right now, the prospects don't look great.
He specifically and expressly said, we sell weapons to Ukraine through the Pearl program. And President Trump here says, I do not sell weapons to Ukraine. I mean, that's why I say that this is just otherworldly kind of crazy talk. I mean, there's the video. It's out there. I'm not the only one who remembered him saying that just last month. And so everybody else is going to. So I don't understand. What if, okay, let's look at this from a different perspective. You're Vladimir Putin. You're Sergei Lavrov. How are you going to deal with the United States in trying to bring this war to an end?
Well, I think they've given up on diplomacy. Again, they hope that the Europeans will stop the blockade on diplomacy. Of course, if the Americans want to talk, they will talk. But their trust in a diplomatic path, I think that died after Anchorage, when the way the Russians presented, at least, is that the Americans came with a proposal which implied some Russian concessions. It's unclear what those concessions were, but there was indications from Lavrov and others that they were willing to make some concessions which were painful. From what I've heard, it entailed, again, I'm not 100% on this, but what I've heard was that the Russians were willing to have a Ukraine which restores its neutrality, which was, again, the foundation of Istanbul. And in terms of the territorial conflict that has derived from it, they will be willing to accept Donbass. Well, they have to have all of Donbass, but for Kherson and Zaporizhia, they would freeze the front lines where they are. And this was, from what I heard, the American proposal. The Russians accepted it. And then the US began to walk the whole thing back. And the Russians were left with the impression that the Americans didn't actually want to put an end to the war. They were merely in the process of outsourcing that war to the Europeans, to make them pay for it and to make themselves frontline states. Which, again, continuing the war could be seen as being in the strategic interest of the US, to the extent that it weakens Russia further. And especially now that the drones are being sent, that allows NATO to target deep inside Russia, that it has a further ability to weaken Russia. And at the same time, the conflict between the Europeans and Russia only makes the European more dependent on the US and more obedient as well. So this is the way they see it now. And they've been watching the diplomacy in Iran, which has been very deceptive all along. Further explanation is not required. So I think what they assume will happen now is more fraudulent diplomacy. So they will continue to seek territorial gain as reassurance of a stable peace after this war. And
let me ask you this question here, because I'm obviously this is just dropped on us, so I'm processing even as we're talking. But putting myself in the adversarial role, how I would view this, Russia and Iran in the two conflicts there. To me, this is like, because of all kinds of things that have happened already. I think it's a given that no one trusts a word that we say. No one trusts a signature on any document, period. I mean, so I don't think that there's any belief in that. And to the extent that either of those two parties were willing to enter into any kind of diplomacy was only, all right, well, if we can put some kind of quid pro quo in here or get something up front, then maybe there's still some room to go down, because if they provide something before we do something else, then maybe we can somehow get out. But when you see something like this, and this direct contradiction with what the president and the secretary of state has said, and what is obvious here, to me, this would say to Russia, there's no point in talking to anything. If you're Iran, there's no point in talking anything. We're just going to try and have to solve this militarily on the battlefield, because they can't even be sane in what they're talking about. Do you see it differently?
No, I agree with that. Well, I could add an additional thing, though. That is, they probably, they know that this is fake, and surely Trump knows that the Russians know. But they probably assume that his main intended audience would be his domestic audience, because he promised them to get out of the Ukraine war, and he has made the Ukraine war a Trump war. That is, the U.S. is still deeply involved, and it's selling weapons. As Rubio said, they're pushing sanctions as hard as they can. The goal is to break Russia, and but to make the Europeans pay the heavier load. So no. But again, it could be that they're simply thinking, well, this is meant for his domestic audience because he was supposed to be the peace president. That being said, I think this is also problematic for them, because we need, not just in the US, in Europe as well, we need a more honest discussion about what we're doing. I mean, if you're in Europe, say that NATO is participating in the strikes on Russia, it's considered Russian propaganda, and you will be smeared and censored, and you will have some profound problems. But we're not accepting our own role in this. I mean, the US public should know that the US is still deeply involved in a war against Russia, something Tucker Carlson had a great segment on recently. And the reason why we need to know this is because we need to know the danger we're facing, because the Russians at this point see increase more and more escalation from NATO, more and more direct involvement by NATO. And also we're going to see in a few months, you're going to see the Ukrainian army beginning to struggle profoundly on the battlefield. And at that point, you're going to have NATO countries becoming panicked again in terms of trying to slow down the Russian advance. And then they might do something stupid, like escalating even further. So the main challenge now in Russia, the main thing causing a lot of concern is, how do we restore the deterrent? Because we allow the NATO to go too far. I mean, NATO countries can strike deep inside Russia. You can have NATO countries speaking openly about how we need to bring the war to Russia. Let's build thousands of ballistic missiles and drones, long range, so we can strike deep into Russia. We'll hand them to Ukraine, pretend as if this is our Ukrainians launching them. I mean, this is what we're doing. And
I want to stop it there. This is why I think this is so extremely dangerous, because their minds seem to me to be focused on the feedback loop of money, arms, as I've said. And I was talking about this last fall. That was where they were going to be going in the EU, within NATO. They want to have their military wartime, as Matt Ho says, wartime Keynesian, warfare Keynesianism. And this is exactly the problem, because they're so disconnected from the effects that has on the people. And they seem to be such elitists who think they can get away with this stuff and utterly disregard. Look, if they're so dismissive of the rights and desires and needs of people in Germany and France and the Netherlands and the UK and other places where they will try to adopt these insane green so-called technologies that clearly are inefficient and only help their corporate fascist friends in those green industries, just like Biden was doing and Obama was doing. And, Trump has his own variation on this sort of thing. Then very clearly, they're utterly dismissive of the living standards of those people. They don't care if their economy is grinding to a halt as long as they can somehow create this feedback loop with their arms manufacturers. And that is going to lead to a greater conflict with the Russians. That's going to lead to more Russian civilians dying, and the Russians are going to have to take care of this kinetically. And Marco Rubio and all those other people in the so-called State Department and the Ministry of War in the United States, they're all part and parcel to it. And Donald Trump's tweet today indicates just how duplicitous and deceptive that man is, to try to claim to people who will read his so-called Truth Social posts that the United States is somehow clean-handed on this when they are really like Lady Macbeth and cannot wipe the blood off their hands, and they keep adding more. That's really troubling. And Donald Trump has set up the perfect circle for the money to keep coming back to the United States. So this is really looking very, very bad. Going to get your thoughts on this and turn to you about the Bad Attitude of the Week award. Finally, give you this real quick from Che Bose. Pete Hegseth says China and Russia are, quote, at different levels, enabling some of the things Iran is doing. Rubio says they are not. Meanwhile, the U.S. is providing missiles and intel to Taiwan and literally providing Ukraine with targeting data to kill Russians. Yeah, that's for sure.